Welcome to Voices in the Void, where we traverse the shadowy realms of the unexplained. A series of eerie encounters reveals a sinister connection. What if the people you trust aren't who they seem? Will anyone escape this nightmare? Watch the full story to find out. When I was 12 years old, I joined my first online community, Gaia Online. The people in the community were a bunch of kids, spending all day discussing anime and collecting sprites. When everyone hid behind colorful avatars and trendy usernames, we could more easily communicate with those we had never met before, making new friends. I lived in Europe, but through the community, I made many friends from all around the world. Among them were Australians, Canadians, Koreans, and so on and so forth. As the years went by, Gaia Online grew bigger and bigger. Among my friends, only one person remained in the end, Jacob. He lived in Manitoba, Canada, in the suburbs of Winnipeg. Although there was a significant time difference between us, we still played together for 1 to 2 hours every day. We'd play MO games together, and even formed a guild. The time difference actually became our advantage, because we could take turns being online, ensuring that most of the day, someone was managing the guild. Later I went to college, and started studying journalism. I had very little time to play games. Jacob was pursuing a dental degree. An hour of game time every day turned into an hour a week, and then, it was an hour a month. By the time I was 25, I suddenly realized that between him and me, it had been a year since we last spoke. Although I still liked his posts on Facebook, that was as far as it went. He had become someone I once knew. Last year, I finally got back in touch with him again. I stayed up until midnight, finally managing to catch him just after he had finished dinner. We talked about our former guild, and now the guild still has people it recruited after us managing it. We also casually chatted about our lives. While we were talking, I asked him why he wanted to become a dentist. I actually had no intention of asking him. I really didn't mean to ask him that question. I just felt that when discussing our professions, it seemed natural for everyone to ask. Evidently, like most people, I had never asked him before why he chose to become a dentist. Everyone thought that Jacob chose this major because his father was a dentist. Jacob told me that he felt like it was some sort of strange family business. He hadn't seriously considered other reasons for choosing this profession. He just thought that it seemed like a stable job. His father seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. Despite that, after discussing this with me, Jacob seemed a bit lost. As if it was the first time he had begun to think about why he wanted to be a dentist. To be honest, I also didn't quite understand his choice. Teeth are something that really creeped me out. A week later, we chatted again. We discussed whether I could take some time to visit him, to meet his family, to fish together, and maybe bring a laptop over, to play some old games together. Then, we returned to talking about his work. He said that he had thought about the question I had previously asked him. Clearly, he had been pondering this matter. I have a strange memory, he said. When I was little, we lived in Homewood. My aunt to work from Friday night until Monday morning, so my dad would go to her house every Saturday to help feed her cats. I noticed that Jacob at that moment seemed not to be talking to me, but rather like he was talking to himself. And I happened to be right next to him. It was as if he needed to get this out. He gave me a strange feeling. I had never heard him speak in such a tone before. It sounded like buzzing nonsense. One summer my dad was injured. He had a car accident and broke both of his arms. His left hand got infected, and he was bedridden for several months. During this time, our family needed someone to help take care of the cats my aunt had. When my dad mentioned this, he had a very serious expression, almost overly serious. I was only 8 at the time, and my 2 sisters were older than me. One was 10 and the other was 12. But for some reason, my dad never intended to let them go. On the contrary, my dad insisted that I should do this thing and that I should keep silent about it. He told me that when you go to your aunt's house, you shouldn't look around. It's impolite. On the first Saturday of that summer, when I was getting ready to feed the cat, my dad stopped me at the front door. He made me put on a metal tube and a small stone hammer. "You're not really going to feed the cat," he said. "Shake if there are teeth on the wall. Make it thorough." That's exactly how he told me. Check if there are teeth on the wall. Make it thorough. I didn't even question my dad. I didn't understand what he meant. But the tone in which he spoke was as if there was a gun pointed at my head. I had never been to my aunt's house, and I couldn't recall what he looked like. It felt like I had never seen him until today. I have never seen my aunt. As he said this, Jacob started to get a bit emotional, and occasionally had to stop to take a few deep breaths. I let out a few short, dry laughs. I didn't know what to say and didn't have the chance to interject. That house stood abruptly in the center of a broad clearing. Very out of place, emitting smells of grease and damp wood. There was no paint on the walls, only bare wooden boards and dull concrete. Even the house keys felt out of place. Holding it felt as if I was grasping a big block of iron. And it was also covered in rust. The condition inside the house was even worse. There were only bare walls and peeling wallpaper. Everything was damp, and the floor had begun to warp. It looked as if it had been abandoned. There was no furniture, only a couch covered with bright linen that had split in two, and a bookshelf tipped over in the middle of the hallway. I took the hammer and the iron bucket and began checking the rooms one by one. In one of the rooms at the back of the house, I finally saw them teeth. There were 6 teeth lined up, each about the size of my thumb. They protruded from the wall, so clear they could not be more obvious, like pimples on skin. Touching them, they seemed to have some warmth to them. I used the hammer to knock them down one by one. I struck them down. Those teeth left a hole in the wall, and something seemed to be moving inside the hole. Maybe it was their roots. One by one, the teeth fell into my iron bucket with a clanging sound. My entire summer was spent like this. Every Saturday, I would return to that house to check where there might be teeth. Sometimes I would find them on the ceiling or on the floor. Sometimes they were as small as a peppermint, and sometimes they were the size of a thumb. They were very sly, appearing in different places each time. One time, because I had forgotten to move the couch for several weeks, I found dozens of teeth all at once behind the couch. By the end of summer, I had collected several buckets of deformed teeth of various sizes. My dad never talked to me about it. He just said, "This is something men do." At the end of summer, I returned the hammer and the bucket to my mom, and she returned to her usual life of feeding the cat. All these years, I probably didn't want to bring it up again. Jacob told me that his father had died a few years ago, and since then, no one had gone to that old house. I didn't know what to say. At that moment, he was just rambling on. I had never heard him speak like this. As if he was recalling this for the first time. What happened that summer felt like a dream. Jacob said, "It's strange. It was the most real experience I've had, but it seems like it never happened. Do you understand what I mean?" Then, he had an excuse to say loudly to me that he was going out to walk the dog, and then logged off. Since then, we have never talked over voice chat again. But we still kept in touch through texts, maintaining contact. I tried to check on him, to see how he was doing now. But our conversations began to grow increasingly superficial. It seemed that in the face of real life, nostalgic feelings could only last for a short time. The last time I received a message from him was 2 months ago. He told me that he had to return to that old house, and he needed to know if what happened that summer was real. The last message I received was, "I'm going to feed the cat." Since then I haven't heard from him again. The phone number he gave me has also been disconnected. I wanted to personally go find Jacob. But due to Europe's slower vaccination process, interstate travel is subject to many restrictions. So I could go find him. I tried to contact Jacob's wife Irene. But at first, she was unwilling to talk to me. She believed I had a bad influence on Jacob, and somewhat blamed me for causing this string of events. However, about 3 weeks ago, Irene got in touch with me again. Clearly, every lead she'd pursued before had hit a dead end. She felt I might know some valuable information. I told her Jacob's various nonsensical childhood memories. But it wasn't until I mentioned Jacob's aunt, and the house in the Homewood suburb, that she first showed a look of excitement. It was obvious she had heard of this place. "We went there once," Irene said, "but not to her aunt's house, but to where she lived as a child." Based on my description, Irene successfully narrowed down the search area, and found the house that Jacob mentioned. Although I had warned her, Irene insisted on going there to look for Jacob. She left her daughter at her sister's house for the weekend, and promised to keep me updated at all times. I assured her that if she wanted to talk to someone, I would be on standby the whole weekend. Irene was also happy to inform me of any updates in the situation. After all, who else would believe such things if not me, the one who told her the story? In the end, Irene found the house. The entire process was surprisingly simple. She knew exactly what she needed to look for. Finding things became very easy. To others not involved, it was just a rundown building they would pass by when walking westwards. Irene described the condition of the house to me. It was an old single-story building. The walls were concrete covered with cheap wood panels. The ground nearby had not a single weed. Every window of the house was fitted with iron bars. On the inside of the windows, there was also a layer of iron sheeting. The front door looked quite new, and the lock was oiled. The back door had been sealed with bricks and cement. She even checked the chimney, finding it stuffed with stones inside. The entire house was sealed off, except for the basement. Irene also worked part-time as a real estate agent, so she knew many tricks that most people were unaware of. Many house entrances are not actually locked, but rather hidden or disguised. Or simply forgotten by someone. And Ira knew where to look for these entrances, and successfully found a way into the basement. But she didn't stay inside for long. The entire basement reeked of ammonia, strong enough that she could barely breathe. However, she did see some things down there. She even sent me a photo. The next day, she went back to that house. This time, she brought a hammer and began to pound on one of the back windows. She couldn't bend the metal bars above, but the wood on the window had begun to rot. So before long, Irene successfully broke through the window. As she began to smash the window frame, she noticed that the wood also, I have to tell you, she said. That smell was disgusting, really too disgusting. An hour later, the police arrived. It seemed that trying to break into a house on the roadside during the day isn't a very smart thing to do. Irene was charged with illegal damage to private property, and was interrogated by the police. When Irene explained that she was looking for her missing husband, the police's attitude immediately changed. They asked Irene to describe Jacob's appearance. It was clear that the police seemed to know who she was talking about. That's right, the police said. It's him, the one who went missing. Irene was taken into the holding cell. She immediately recognized Jacob locked inside. Only, she looked as if she had just walked through hell. Jacob was still wearing the black jacket, jeans and shirt he had worn when he left home, but he was missing one shoe. His hair was frizzy and dry, and his breath carried a hint of ammonia. As I embraced her, she didn't even lift her head. Irene said, she just sat there dazed. Jacob appeared to have experienced some kind of trauma. When local police found her, she was wandering aimlessly on the main road, and her bare foot was dripping blood. The police tried to talk to Jacob or look for documents that could prove her identity, but found nothing. The police bandaged Jacob's foot, but had no idea what to do with her. They weren't even sure if Jacob had slept at all during those days in the station. She gave me the impression that even though the lights were on in the room, Aline explained to me, it was as if no one was there. As soon as Aline recognized Jacob, she was immediately taken to a nearby clinic. Because she was unable to move on her own, the police carried her directly out of the police station. Upon arriving at the clinic, the doctor cleaned Jacob up, and then conducted a series of tests. They collected Jacob's blood samples, saliva, and urine, and took many x-rays. The doctor mainly examined the wounds on Jacob's feet, but was also looking for any signs of trauma to her head. The results showed that apart from the sprained foot, there were no other abnormalities in her body. However, Aline found something strange in her x-rays. She discovered some odd things. Her wisdom teeth were still there. Aline said, it shouldn't be. After we had been married for a year, she had them removed. It had been about 3 weeks since this happened. Aline brought Jacob back home, and took her to a trauma specialist for treatment. Some suggested that she should see a psychologist, because Jacob's behavior was as if she had experienced some intense shock. I also scheduled an appointment with a dentist to check her wisdom teeth. I had never heard of wisdom teeth growing back after being extracted. That's simply impossible. Aline told me that Jacob's behavior was very strange after coming home. Her actions were quite unnatural. Upon seeing her daughter, she showed no reaction at all. She would sit motionless all night, then suddenly stand up and run into the bathroom to stare at the mirror, then awkwardly return to the sofa, or the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sometimes, she would also make sounds. Aline explained, and it's not the kind of quiet sounds. She was almost screaming, as if she was trying to force some sound out of her lungs. All of this was too heavy for their daughter. So Aline decided to send her to her grandparents' home, planning to wait until her father's condition improved before bringing her back. The trauma specialist found no issues with Jacob. He didn't find any problems. Her head showed no signs of trauma, and her vision and hearing were both intact. Jacob's body still reacted to sounds and light, but she seemed to be completely indifferent to these external stimuli. The psychologist couldn't do anything either, because Jacob wouldn't speak at all. If you put your finger in front of her, she would stare at your finger, but before long, she would lose interest. Aline's like to me, just like before. She gives me the feeling of a wet room where the lights are bright, yet there's no one inside. Finally, Aline took Jacob to the dentist. It went there early in the morning, being the first patients of the day. The doctor only knew that Aline's support for Jacob seemed a bit strange. He wanted to conduct an examination, but when the doctor opened Jacob's mouth, she was immediately startled by the sight before her. Hyperdontia, Aline said. That's how the doctor explained it to me. Jacob suffered from severe hyperdontia. In layman's terms, Jacob had too many teeth. She had almost grown a second row of teeth. Full set of teeth, all molars and old teeth. Except for the incisors, almost every type of tooth was present. The doctor also noticed that Jacob's tongue was very dry, with over a dozen ulcers on it. In addition, her gums were severely discolored. Just a few days prior, Jacob had taken an X-ray at the clinic, and it's not possible for a normal person to grow a new set of teeth in just a few days. Teeth don't just grow that way. Jathing had too many teeth in her mouth, and when she opened her mouth, it made a clacking sound, like the sound of cracking knuckles. It was the same sound. A week passed, and there was no sign of improvement. Jacob's teeth had turned from 2 rows into 4. Some teeth began to shrink, while others continued to grow outward. Jacob could no longer close her mouth normally. Its lower jaw is somewhat dislocated. It has grown a row of thick lower teeth. One of the canine teeth pierced its lip. Jacob's breathing began to grow heavy. Erin did everything she could to find various specialists for Jacob, but Jacob's symptoms are shrouded in too many mysteries. Not a single expert believes that there is really such a thing as spontaneous hyperdontia. It gradually began to smell. Erin said it's that smell of ammonia. Erin wanted to give Jacob a bath, but it was very difficult. To get Jacob into the bathroom, the only thing it could do was to use a shower head to rinse Jacob off, and Erin couldn't even wash Jacob's hair, because it would unhesitatingly suck the water up its nose. Jacob has completely lost the instinct to hold its breath. Its breathing sounded as if it was coming from its throat. A few days after Erin's last conversation with me one night, Jacob suddenly relapsed and rushed into the bathroom. But this time the situation was somewhat different from before. It emitted a terrifying gurgling sound like a cat coughing up a hairball. The entire sink was filled with scattered teeth. There were nearly 20 of them. Blood continuously flowed from Jacob's mouth. Erin quickly called an ambulance, attempting to use a cloth to plug Jacob's mouth to help stop the bleeding. Jacob showed no response, but its breathing returned to normal. Its jaw also returned to its original position. Every extra tooth fell out on its own. After spending a night in the emergency room, Jacob was discharged. And her body recovered well. Erin hadn't slept all night, so as soon as they got home, Erin collapsed on the sofa and fell asleep. At that moment she was completely exhausted. The pressure that had built up over these weeks finally whelmed her. 11 hours later she woke up, and then discovered Jacob was sitting on the sofa next to her, smiling at her. She actually said good morning to me. She hadn't said a word in weeks yet. Today she suddenly said good morning to me. Her eyes had also become lively, and had suddenly returned to life, as if everything had returned to normal overnight. Jacob felt much better, but for now couldn't return to work, she said. She seemed to be in a state of sleepwalking, but she couldn't even need more detailed explanations. She returned to her original self, though the cut on her mouth still hurt a bit, and although she hadn't maintained her oral hygiene for a long time, the speed of her mouth ulcer healing was still incredibly fast. But the shadowy color still hadn't. But everything began to return to normal, even though only a few days had passed. Erin explained to me, I had planned to put everything that had happened behind me. I didn't want to call you, but there was one thing. I was still very concerned about the teeth she had spat out. Were gone, but I hadn't cleaned up those teeth at all. Even though they had brought their daughter back home, life had returned to normal. but Aaron indicated that Jacob was still a bit strange. Sometimes Jacob would get up in the middle of the night. Aaron could hear her opening and closing doors. She would even put on socks to muffle her footsteps. One time Aaron even heard Jacob moving furniture around. 2 nights ago Aaron pretended she was already asleep. Then saw Jacob sneaking into the kitchen. She crawled under the kitchen sink, gently tapping on something. The next day Aaron didn't confront Jacob directly, but first checked under the sink. I knew that this was all incredibly ridiculous, Aaron said. Under the sink were dozens of teeth all fastened to the wall. With a mallet Aaron didn't know what to do. I know what to say to her. She initially thought this nightmare was over, but things began to worsen recently. She found a tooth in the kitchen sink. Disposal. The teeth under the sink were also multiplying. A few days ago, her daughter accidentally stepped on a canine tooth at school, and those teeth returned to the wall again. Jacob had meticulously put them back one by one. She is staring her teeth back at that damn wall. This job is incredibly boring, but it's quite easy, and the pay is decent. Not long ago a new employee showed up at the gas stations. Let's call him Jeremy. Jeremy is a very strange guy. He's around 25 or 26 years old. He hardly ever speaks, but Jeremy has the most bizarre laugh I've ever heard. The weirdest laugh in my life. Both my boss and I've noticed this trait of his. However, since he's never caused any trouble because of his laughter, we didn't have much to say about it. Jeremy's never received a complaint from a customer, and he always does his job well. But a few weeks ago the gas station owner noticed that things were always going missing in the store. Employee theft is an unavoidable issue for all retail. This is a small gas station. There's usually only one employee working. About 2 weeks ago my boss started to notice that the oil in the store was always disappearing. At first, only 2 or 3 bottles would go missing each time, and was oil from the whole shelf and the boxes in the back that would be taken all at once. Finally, the situation escalated to whole batches of stock vanishing by the next day after delivery, and each theft occurred after Jeremy had clocked out. My boss reviewed the footage from when Jeremy worked each night, but he never caught any leads. Jeremy would lock up after the store closed, and the next day the store's oil would be gone. The boss usually takes the surveillance tapes home to see if he caught Jeremy stealing something. But because his daughter has a soccer game tonight, the boss asked me to help him check today's tapes and said he would pay me extra for the overtime. I agreed to his request. The store has 3 cameras in total, so the boss handed me 3 different tapes. I knew it was no way I'd be going to bed early tonight, but since I've been saving for a vacation, I really needed this extra income. I took the tapes home and put them into an old VHS player, then sat down. The tapes contained footage from 2 days ago, specifically starting from the last time Jeremy worked. He began his shift at 4 in the afternoon. At first, everything seemed completely normal. He counted the money in the drawer and greeted the girl from the previous shift, then waited for the first customer to arrive. The first person to walk in was Mrs. Dumpton. She is a regular at the store. According to the timestamp on the video, it was now 3 p.m. Mrs. Dumpton picked up cigarettes and a newspaper, then paid with a $20 bill. Everything seemed normal. The second customer was a local named Ron, who usually comes around every few days. He rode a motorcycle, bought a bag of beef jerky, and paid with a credit card, and left. The next customer was a man in a cowboy. I had never seen this person before. But like all gas stations, we have many strangers passing through. He bought $40 worth of diesel and paid with a $100 bill. Then he walked out of the store. I leaned back inside. The only thing more boring than working at a gas station is watching others work at the gas station until, however, the overtime pay given by the boss was enough for me to keep watching, so I let continue to play. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I felt if the person stealing oil, he should know. We'd been suspecting him. I didn't think he would be stupid enough to let the cameras catch him in the act of theft. Everything on the surveillance looked monotonous and dull until around 5 p.m. At 5:03 p.m., Mrs. Dumpton walked back into the store. She must have forgotten something, but she wasn't back to retrieve anything. She bought a pack of cigarettes, just like the last time, and the same newspaper, then paid with another $20 bill. I found it a bit strange, but then I thought that Mrs. Dumpton is a bit forgetful. to tell her she had already bought cigarettes, but the gas station didn't have a rule against selling the same item to the same customer. At that moment Ron walked in again and bought a gallon of gas. I later checked the outdoor surveillance footage, because I thought maybe Ron had another bike to fill up, and paid with his credit card. Nothing too out of the ordinary. This should just be a strange coincidence. Mrs. Dumpton's very forgetful, and Ron might own more than one Harley. Then the man in the cowboy hat walked into the store again. I felt a chill run down my spine. Don't buy diesel, don't buy diesel, I said to the empty living room to myself, but she did the exact same thing as before. She bought $40 worth of diesel, then pulled out a $100 bill to pay. Every move she made was identical to when she first came in. Even the way he scratched his nose when leaving was identical to how it was before. Either this person is very wealthy with many trucks and has just moved to town, or something very strange has happened. I continued to look down for the next hour. Every customer that came in was exactly the same as an hour ago. Each guessed exactly the same things. I was a bit scared. Then at 6:03, Mrs. Dumpton walked in again. She bought cigarettes and a newspaper, and paid with a $20 bill. I felt like I was going crazy. I'd only looked down for half an hour, and then I fast-forwarded through the rest. The following content was also all the same. Every customer would enter the store at the same time, walking into the shop, with exactly 1 hour in between. I know what you're thinking. That sneaky Jeremy must have tampered with the tape. He must have set his first hour of work video to loop on replay. But that's not the case. Through the surveillance footage, I could see the area around the counter, as well as a few windows. As time passed, the sunlight outside gradually dimmed, and Jeremy's own movements were not looped either. He would normally sweep the floor, mop the floor, restock the shelves, but the same customers continuously walked in, again and again. At this point, I was getting anxious. The scene shared on the surveillance footage were definitely problematic, but I couldn't provide a reasonable explanation. I fast-forwarded to the moment Jeremy locked the store and walked toward his car. He didn't take anything from the store, but just in case, I continued to watch. I pressed fast-forward one last time to skip to midnight. At exactly 12:03 a.m., Jeremy's face suddenly appeared on the screen. It wasn't just that he leaned into the camera. 1 second before, the store was completely empty. The next second, the whole screen was filled with his face. I was sure he wasn't looking at the camera, but looking at me. I screamed as I fumbled for the remote, but when I picked up the remote, Jeremy had vanished. Just like when he appeared, one moment his face was still on the screen, the next moment, he was gone. Even though my hands were shaking wildly, I still inserted another tape into the VCR. Another indoor camera filmed the area behind the counter. From this angle, I could see how Jeremy blocked the camera with his face. I fast-forwarded to 12:03, but didn't see anything. I had expected to see him standing on a chair, looking at the camera or something like that, but Jeremy was not in the store. Ever since he left after his shift, he never came back in. He didn't know the store door code. That night after locking up, the store's security alarm was never triggered either. That I did see that at 12:03, the oil on the shelves was never activated. Then I truly saw that at 12:03, the oil on the shelves all disappeared in an instant. Just like Jeremy's face. Just 1 second, it was there, the next second it was gone. I turned off the tape and lay back in bed. But I couldn't sleep a second. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing. That tape, without a doubt, was the strangest and most unsettling thing I had ever seen. In a few hours, I would have to go to work. My boss asked me to bring back the tape and tell him what I found. But to be honest, what should I tell him? Jeremy would be working the night shift, right after mine. My plan was to have my boss come to the store before I clocked out, so we could confront Jeremy together. After all, I was the one who caught Jeremy stealing. But what exactly should I do? I had to let my boss see the tapes, but I didn't plan to watch it with him. I never wanted to see that smiling image of Jeremy again. It's always in my mind, refusing to leave. This is the most terrifying expression I've ever seen. In any case, I need to seize the moment to take a little nap. I'll tell you all later what happened. Update 2:49 p.m. I'm typing on my phone right now, so there might be some typos. So I want to apologize in advance. My boss just finished watching the last tape. I had already warned him about what would be in it. But to see it with his own eyes was still very terrifying. He's scared to death right now, just like I am. And Jeremy will come to the store at 4 o'clock. He'll be here soon. We have a little over an hour to pull ourselves together. But we have no idea what to say to him. Is he just a jerk who likes to steal oil and scare others on the side? Or something else entirely? I don't know if this sounds crazy, but don't you think his behavior might be related to time loops? My boss said he had never seen such a thing in the previous tapes. But the scene where Jeremy suddenly appears on camera made me feel like he might have known I would be watching this tape. It was like he wanted to show off his abilities to me, as if he was bragging. His smile at the camera was like a child showing you the sandcastle he just built. I don't know how to explain it. My words might sound like a madman's. I need to talk to my boss again. We must calm down and think about how to handle this issue. I'll give another update tonight. But I have a bad feeling about what will happen next. I have an honest premonition. Update 4:33 p.m. We haven't seen Jeremy. I tried calling his phone, but it keeps not going through. We need to call the police. Update 5:33 p.m. We haven't seen Jeremy. I tried calling his phone, but it keeps not going through. We need to call the police. Update 6:33 p.m. We haven't seen Jeremy. I tried calling his phone, but it keeps not going through. Update 7:33 p.m. We haven't seen Jeremy. I tried calling his phone, but it keeps not going through. We need to call the police. Update 8:33 p.m. We haven't seen Jeremy. I tried calling his phone, but it keeps not going through. We need to call the police. Update 10:58 p.m. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. I just got home and saw the updates on my previous post. Things have become increasingly strange. Here's the situation. I went to work at the gas station, but Jeremy didn't show up. And then, as you know, my boss and I decided to call the police. But just as I picked up the phone, the sun set. I'm not lying to you, at least in my eyes, that's how it was. Obviously, I blacked out for a full 5 hours. Because when I looked at the clock in the store, the hands were pointing at 9:33. I feel like I've gotten trapped in Jeremy's time loop. And then, at the very moment I lost consciousness, I suddenly escaped from the loop. I don't know if you can understand me, but it was at that very moment that things started getting even weirder. When I lost consciousness, my boss was right next to me, ready to prove to the police that my story was true. My phone was still in my hand, but it was dead. The landline in the store even had no basic dial tone. My boss was still standing there, but he was completely still, as if frozen in place. I looked at the clock again, and the hands weren't moving. The second hand was stuck at 12. The time was exactly 9:33. The clock on the radio was also frozen. In front of the radio, there was even a customer standing, waiting for my boss to get him cigarettes. I'm sure this is already the 5th pack he's bought today. I ran straight out of the store. The door wasn't locked and the lights weren't turned off. I also didn't take today's surveillance video out to post online. I'm really sorry, but I really didn't have the mindset to think about such things. This gas station is located next to a highway. There was a row of cars parked on the road. However, those cars weren't parked on the highway, but were all frozen in place. The people inside the cars were as still as wax figures sitting frozen, without moving. I got into my own car praying that it would start. Fortunately, the engine successfully started. When I was halfway home, time returned to normal. The static in the radio changed back to the usual music, according to the radio host during the chatter between songs. It seemed that no one noticed that time had just paused. Or any other strange occurrences. I was the only one who noticed something was off. Well, I suppose Jeremy Kinting noticed it too, but I still don't know where he is now, or what he is doing. I am currently hiding in my room, preparing to call the police tomorrow morning. I don't know if I contacted them before. If I did, would they take me seriously? I feel like my life is in danger now. If possible, I will update again tomorrow. Last update at 10:33 a.m. Last night I finally fell asleep around 4. I don't even know how I managed that. Perhaps I was just too exhausted. This morning I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was my boss calling. He had been calling me since 6 a.m. nonstop. After time returned to normal last night, he suddenly woke up and immediately called the police. When the police arrived at the gas station, my boss told them everything. Everything, but the police here are all minor players. They only cared about the stolen oil from the store. However, my boss didn't mind as long as it caught the police's attention. After understanding the situation, they decided to find out Jeremy's whereabouts first. The gas station kept all employee applications on file because Jeremy had only recently started working here. They easily found his application record. The police checked the address written on it, and then went to his home. You absolutely won't believe what the police found there. The address Jeremy filled in on the application was a vacant lot at least. That's how it looks now. There used to be a house there, but it was burned down in 1993. Our town is very small. Almost everyone remembers that fire. A family of 4 used to live in that house. Rumor has it that they had a son with whom they had a strained relationship. But they almost never mentioned this son, so I'm not sure if it's true. What I can confirm is after the insurance company's investigations, the fire was ruled as arson. Someone drenched the whole house in gasoline, and then lit the house with a Molotov cocktail. The people inside the house were all asleep when the fire occurred, so no one escaped alive. The police never caught the arsonist. There are rumors that they tried to contact that son, who had a bad relationship with the family, but could never reach him. In any case, when my boss called to tell me this, I was terrified. Then he asked me to come to the gas station. I told him, "Are you crazy?" But he assured me the police were waiting for me at the gas station with him. Then my boss suddenly told me that the FBI people had also arrived, and they wanted to talk to me at all costs, so I'd best go there. It was around 7:15 a.m. at that time. I wanted to go back to sleep, but thinking about it, I wouldn't be able to sleep long anyway. So I drove to the gas station. 4 men in suits welcomed me, and then had me sit down. I recounted everything 2 to 3 times, until they had noted down all the details. I told them about Jeremy, and what I saw in the surveillance video, and what happened while I was working yesterday. I told them everything in the end. After I finished recounting everything, one of the agents said, "Oh no, we've got another one." Then they had me sign a stack of documents, making me promise I wouldn't tell anyone about what happened here. So regarding the other matters, I can't discuss them further. Perhaps just posting this would already violate the agreement. Now I'm back home. I know what to do. I think I might never forget the words of that agent after hearing my story. Anyway, I need to go now. I have some things to take care of today, and I also need to go to work and pick up some tapes while I'm at it. My boss and I both think that this new employee, Jeremy, is a weird guy, and that he's also stealing oil from the store. I need to check the surveillance footage to see if it captured him stealing anything. Although I have other things to do, the boss privately gave me some overtime pay. I'm saving up for a vacation, so I really need this money. It should be quite simple. I just need to look at the footage, find evidence of him stealing, and then the problem will be resolved. Thank you for journeying with us into the unknown. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell to stay updated.